I'm sorry. Okay, so we just got a question. Would Jesus be considered conservative or liberal? And I'm going to focus this, of course, within the topic of religion, not within politics.
No.
Because, yeah, Jesus isn't really saying, I like this form of government more so than this one. Basically, when he says, my kingdom is not of this world, he's dividing himself away from it, so we won't get into that. But is Jesus conservative or is he liberal? So,
If I may add here, he always had, compared to others, he always had a divine judgment within him. So he would never get to extremes, I would say, or
yeah, at least not in the extremes that we would define as extremes.
Yeah.
Because we could say, well, it's very extreme to bring about death for somebody who's committed the small sin, but the soul that sins is the soul that dies. So no matter how slight the sin is, there is a consequence for that. So we might consider that extreme. But God does not take the extremes that we see as extremes.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you mentioned before was attitude towards women, attitude towards children, and I'd like to bring up at least a few different categories. So let's look at creation, and let's make this pre-fall specifically, because that will help us understand what God is trying to do. And then we could also say, well, what is Jesus trying to usher in? And this would be the paradise to come. So if Jesus is trying to go to the limits of his ideas, well, it's going to be coming out here. Yeah. So here now we're going to get into more Jesus versus Pharisees territory. Okay. So let's start off with women. So where do women come up in the creation?
well, with the creation of man.
Background.
Yeah. So we have woman coming from man. And these same kind of wordplay that we have in English. So you have man, you have woman, so you have a little bit of a shift in the word. Same basic idea even in Hebrew, because the word for a man is ish, and then a woman is isha. So one is just masculine, the other is feminine. That's the basic difference. So you're recognizing that they have the same root, but there are some differences between them. So one of the other things that we could even say is, well, God has specific reason to bring about woman. Why is God? Well, technically, the word here is building. Why did God build a woman from man's side?
A helper.
So we have helper. Then we also have companions, because it's not good for man to be alone. So God creates woman so that man would not be alone, that he'd have company and companionship. But even more than that, because there's something very specific when man and woman comes together in a one flesh union.
So the word woman comes from the word man. So does the word womb come from women?
I do not think so. I'd have to check the etymology on that. I was watching okay, so there's this thing online called Bardcore. Bardcore is where you take modern songs and then you put them into historical settings. So there was a guy who did an Alice in Chains song. So if you don't know Alice in Chains, think Nirvana, Kurt Cobain, that type of style. And he put it into medieval Latin. Sorry, early English. So one of the words in that song is womb, and it actually comes up in the Germanic. So it doesn't look like it's coming directly from a woman, though. I know woman and man are actually Germanic in origin, but yeah, woman seems to be a completely different word. Anyways, but one of the specific purposes behind like them not being alone would also be fruitful and multiply. And I say that this is an application of being in the image of God. So God creates, and yeah, and we create, like we naturally do this. This is what we always try to do. Like even if it's just the most basic jobs that we have, we still try to do something. If we don't have the purpose, we don't create something, we don't shift around something, we go insane. Like we need purpose. When I'm writing articles for Lutherans for Life, like this is one of the things I go back to again and again with people considering assisted suicide, because the mass majority of them don't see them as useful anymore, that they don't have a purpose because they're in a situation, whether it's because of their mental health or physical health, that they can't do the same stuff that they used to do before. That gave them purpose. They're removed from that purpose now. So how do we give their lives new purpose? How can they be redirected? So being fruitful and multiply, of course, we're looking to children, but this is also looking to the creation. So what is Eve helping the man to do?
Building a life, building a home.
Building a home. Okay, yeah. Caring for Earth. Yeah, I'll just kind of continue and say that, yeah. So dominion, have dominion over Earth, and then you also have caretaker. Who's the caretaker of animals? Because that was one of the things that Adam was doing. He was naming the animals. God was parading them in front of him, and he realized, none of these things are like me. I need somebody like me. And then you have woman, and then now together they're looking after those animals, also having dominion over the earth. They're looking after the plants. So when you have certain images of, let's say, Eden or the paradise to come. Well, actually, let's say paradise to come. Let's go. So when you have images of the paradise to come, like sometimes it seems like a garden similar to Eden. At other times it's like a city. But when it's a garden, then, well, how do we do gardens now? Like we could say, oh, well, we do things like backyard gardens. Like we have very beautiful stuff that we all try to arrange and look nice, and like that won't occur naturally. You have to actually plant these things in specific ways. So this is part of being in the image of God, is that we try to beautify the creation, try to bring different things together to try and work in harmony.
To cultivate, maybe.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I'll put that. Cultivate it. That sounds good. Yeah, because part of this was Adam and Eve didn't have to work for their food. Like it's only after the fall that they have to exert themselves. So by the sweat of the brow, you're working in thorn and thistles and actually able to get your daily bread. But here, like, yeah, you would still be able to go out and you would be able to cultivate these things. You could put all these things in a row if you really wanted to, the different fruits that you like in a row. Because the only commandment that God really had was don't eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And Adam and Eve could, yeah, just worship God. They could just walk up to the tree of knowledge, just stand there and not eat it. And there they are, worshiping God, because they're following his commandment right there, just looking there and just not admiring it and not eating. There you go, that's worship. A little bit different than our worship services today. But anyway, so here I just want to expand on this word a little bit, because even though we're saying that it's helper, like this isn't a subordinate role really, because we might say, well, Eve was Adam's assistant or something like that, but that's not exactly the sense of the word. It would actually be closer to companion, in the sense that, well, I guess you could say, like, this is a horrible translation, so don't take this as like, oh yeah, we should retranslate Bibles for this. But you could even put here associate. But typically, when we're talking about these things in theological circles, we're saying it's a complementary view. That Eve complements Adam, like where he, as a man, has certain innate qualities. So men typically have more muscle mass, greater height, so they're able to do some of the more heavier lifting. But women tend to be more nurturing in their disposition and more caring that way, like especially caring for the fruit of their womb. And then man is the one who's going out and making sure that everything that his wife and his child need are given to them. So there's different roles that they take. So yes, they're different, but they still have their places within creation. Yeah. So I'm just going to jump over to kind of the paradise angle of this. So where are men and women, like what, like where do women fit in the paradise to come?
I have absolutely no idea.
Okay, I was wondering.
The same as man, wouldn't it?
Yeah, pretty much the same.
Just doesn't differentiate when he talks about paradise between men and women, does he?
No, not really. And I'll get to something more specific in relation to this, but generally, no, there's not that much. So we could even defer to St. Paul where he says, neither male nor female. Let's put a division between male female in salvation. So this is coming up in Galatians 3:28, and people like to misquote this or abuse the context. But really, what's happening in that place in Galatians 3:28 there is that St. Paul saying, well, we're not looking to race, we're not looking to gender, we're not looking to social status in terms of salvation. Everybody is justified by Christ by faith alone. There is no innate division. We don't need to try and say, well, women are a subservient class to men in any way in the paradise. When we come into the church, yes, men and women have different roles, but that's pertaining to who they are as men and women. We're not going to say that women have to do more in order to be saved. So there was one particular heretic I encountered online many years ago. He was off his rocker in many ways. Anyway, but one of the things he said was, well, since man came first and he was in the image of God, then women are derivative from man. Therefore, all women need to be married to a man in order to be saved. This is why God made polygamy. So all women should absolutely cling to a faithful man so that they might be saved. So marry me a whole bunch of women. Yeah. Anyway, so you can definitely go off the deep end on some of these crazy interpretations of scripture.
Well, in heaven, will there be two sexes?
We have absolutely every reason to believe that there will be.
Because he said there'll be no marriage.
Yes. So let's get to that. So there's the command to be fruitful and multiply here. And unfortunately, I can't remember the exact chapter and verse of this. I want to say Matthew 19, but I don't think that's right. Because Matthew 19 is about divorce, but I can't remember where this is exactly. But so Jesus says, neither marries, so that would be more masculine because the man is the one who makes the proposal, nor given in marriage. And that would be more the feminine because women would be in the household of the father until the father relinquishes his God-given obligation to protect his daughter and trust that to the new husband. So, so here, what's being said is not let's remove gender, because that's how people misinterpret this. Because they're trying to say, oh yeah, well there won't be any genders in heaven. We'll all be, I don't know, Ken dolls down there.
Neutral.
But we have absolutely no word about that. Really, what we're seeing is the paradise to come is an image of the original creation fulfilled. Because this was pre-fall, this was supposed to be what the world would look like without sin. We're going back to the state where the world is without sin. Now, paradise will be greater than the creation because we're in a new relationship with God, whereas people could fall into sin here. Well, now Jesus Christ is, well, amongst us as our risen, that is, resurrected Lord. And we will not fall into sin because we've already been there and done that. We're completely renewed. So there's differences here, but we're still seeing that God will restore things. So if you are a male now, there's no reason why God would suddenly remove your masculinity when he raises you from the dead. Why would he? If you're a woman now, why would God remove your femininity when you're raised from the dead? That, like he made you to be man or woman. He made Adam to be man in the beginning. It doesn't say that God made one intersex individual with no gender and then he split them apart, one to male, one to female. That's actually in pagan Greek religion. We don't have that in this. And there's only one major philosopher pre-Socrates that I know of tried to promote that. But yeah, we don't really have this over here. So when we're being resurrected, there's no reason for us to believe that we suddenly lose ourselves. And if we want to have confirmation of this, what we should do is we should look to Jesus Christ because he was raised from the dead. So he is the one who is perfect in his flesh, raised from the dead. So if we want to see, well, okay, what would our resurrected bodies look like? Christ would be our best guess. Now, of course, Christ is Christ. There's going to be some things that are particular only to him. But when we see Jesus raised from the dead, he was still a man. The disciples never questioned this. Even when St. John has his visions of Jesus in the book of Revelation, where Jesus is like he's glowing white, that his face is brighter than the sun, that he's clothed with robes of a heavenly priest. John at no point uses anything but masculine pronouns for him. Like he doesn't see him as anything other than man.
So if I mean complete, so in paradise, people remain in their original distinction, male or female.
Yeah.
That because they neither marry nor are given in marriage.
Yes.
They practice celibacy, or they are
Yeah.
in a state of celibacy.
Yes. That would be a good way to put it. So the idea of marriage specifically is tied to being fruitful and multiply, like making more children. But we don't have that idea in the paradise to come. That's one of the things that is not happening anymore. You can even say, well, what about the angels? And you could say, well, the angels don't seem to actually increase in number. God created them in the beginning. And Jesus says it will be like angels, neither marrying nor giving in marriage. So the angels aren't having any kids.
Mm-hmm.
So we would be like them in the sense that, yeah, we're not producing children anymore. This seems to be of the original creation, but we're in a different relationship here. So yeah, in that sense, since women won't be fulfilling that specific role, now we know that women would be fulfilling that role here, and I'll go to let's see, St. Paul, and he talks about this a little bit. where he says, say like in First Timothy, was it 2:15? He says, women will be saved through childbirth. And sometimes this is difficult to understand, but what St. Paul seems to be saying is that since there is a begetting of children, a begetting of the one, Jesus Christ, when you are fulfilling your original design, you are participating in proper ethical relationship to God and to the rest of humanity. That seems to be more what he's saying. He's not saying, yeah, women, you have to pump out as many babies as you can, and that earns you extra points for heaven. No. Some people try to interpret that text that way. Again, that's not good. But what Paul seems to be saying is that women should be participating in their creational role. But St. Paul also talks about in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and he has a whole bunch of things that he's talking about there. But he's also saying that singleness is virtuous. Now, St. Paul isn't saying that everybody in the church should be single. He's saying that he would recommend that for some, because then you could devote more of your time to God rather than taking care of your spouse and your kids. So, and St. Paul is saying that more of himself too. He's saying like, yeah, I'm able to do so much because I'm not tied down to a specific family. Paul is not saying that having a family is wrong, not by any means, but he's saying for some, this is good, and they should take part of this. So
could he be referring to women are saved because the childbirth of Christ?
yeah, that's part of it. Yes, absolutely. But Paul is also not decrying singleness. So if men or women in the church decide to be single, so not being fruitful and multiplying per se, then this isn't depriving you of your salvation, but you should be acting properly in faith, whatever you do, wherever you find yourself in faith. And even later on in First Timothy talks about widows, those who are without children, and says, well, if you don't have children, then take care of those who are in the church. That can be your appointed role. So he's saying like, yeah, just because you haven't had children doesn't mean that this is wrong in any way, but you should be loving one another as Christ has loved us. That basic sentiment. Okay, so women, now helper and companion. In the paradise, what do you think will happen? What would be your roles?
Praising God.
Yeah, there. That's definitely one of them. Anything else?
Worshipping him.
Slash worship. Yeah.
Well, that song, praising God and praising my Savior all day long.
Well, take care of the new heavens and the new.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Can't say
So there will still be some vocations that we have, because we're not just floating on the clouds, just praising God, worshiping God all the time. Like it seems to be that since God has fashioned each one of us for different things, and that God still, like we would be in a restored image of God, what would we be doing? And if we look to the old new creation, and seeing, well, we're still taking care of that, we're still molding this, molding that, we're still interacting with it. It still seems that women will be in a helper or companion role, but in a sanctified sense, because right now we're dealing with this, and men in their roles, like all of us are dealing with sinfulness as we're trying to live out our vocations. This is why you get abusive men. This is why you also get manipulative women, is because even though we were set to try and be in certain roles, we're abusing those roles. So men, when they're in a position where they are, say, like head of the household, which is what we'd be finding more here, of course, men would abuse this by, well, basically saying, I get to do everything. No, you wife, you don't get to do what you want to do. Just serve me. Go and make me a sandwich. That type of thing, where they're more bossing them around than actually trying to love them as somebody who bears the greater responsibility in that relationship. Because the more authority you have in any relationship, the more responsibility you foster. So this is why St. Paul, and he's talking about this here. And sorry, yeah, I know that's saying Jesus, but St. Paul helps explain the teachings of Jesus. You also have Ephesians chapter 5. Oh, sorry, 5, where men are to be as Christ, or I should say husbands. Husbands are to be like Christ, to be like Christ, and women, or no, wives, there we go, wives, to be like the church. So as the church, like as we are able to trust Christ, that he is our best interest at heart, that we can absolutely trust him, that we can just give him every one of our anxieties and burdens. This is what a wife should be able to feel in that relationship. Now, of course, you have a lot of women who's like, I don't think I can trust my husband with that. Well, yeah, that's also probably because the husband isn't living up to his role perfectly. That he's not playing the part of Christ who is properly laying his life down for the benefit of his bride. So yes, we have to deal with the sinful world, which is why people are saying like, this, I'm uncomfortable with being a helper and companion. I think that sin was a good thing because that got us out of this oppressive role in the beginning. We were able to do a lot more. It's like, no, like that's not it. It's, you cannot trust people in your own society to look after your best interests. That's the issue. So what those women who are striving after more authority are doing, they're trying to, well, in at least in certain ways, they're trying to have more control over their lives because they fear that other people who would have more control over their lives, maybe specifically men, that they will abuse that control. So the women want to take more control so that they can feel safer. Mm-hmm. So that's not necessarily because women are doing horrible, wicked things, but also that men have failed in society. I don't want to just point fingers and say it's all women's fault. No, because men have absolutely played a part. You're also suffering from sin.
You were talking about, kind of disagreements between the factions here. The disciples, what they really had to worry about after Jesus passed away and went to heaven was to look after themselves, to survive, so they could spread the gospel, right? The good news, to stay alive, to do what Jesus asked them to do.
I'm going to push against that, because Jesus told them, well, a couple different things. One of them is, surely I'm with you to the end of the age. So he's saying that, yeah, you're not doing this alone, I'm with you. Yeah. But he also had in Matthew chapter 10, well before that, I'm sending you out as sheep amongst wolves. There will be people who accuse you in the synagogues, there will be people who will beat you, people who want to kill you. But do not fear the one who will destroy the body, but fear the one who will destroy both body and soul in hell. Mm-hmm. So Jesus isn't telling his disciples, your job is to stay alive. Jesus is telling his disciples, your job is to spread the good news. Yeah. And which is why almost all the apostles were martyred. Yeah.
Yeah. So when did it really start? Do we know when the people of the church, the Christians, started to disagree in certain areas? Which is a natural
The book of
human
Acts.
behavior, right? Which is a natural human behavior. If you reach a certain level, you want to push maybe your opinion. So when did that start?
Yeah.
After the days were over where they were totally persecuted? Did
Dude, we never ended those things.
did they really start to disagree when they were no longer as fiercely persecuted?
We've always been under persecution,
Okay.
especially the first several centuries. But no, we find the first disagreements in the book of Acts. Because the first major disagreement is over, well, how are you truly saved? For anyone tuning in, you can also check out the YouTube channel where I have a history of the Christian church. I go into this in depth. So the first major disagreement among Christians is, well, how are you saved? And this is bringing into conflict the Jews and the Gentile converts. Well, actually, it's more conflict between the Jews over the Gentile converts. Because some of them are saying, well, we as Jews, we were under the law of Moses. Therefore, in order to be saved, the Gentiles must first be subjected to the law of Moses, and then they can receive the salvation of Jesus Christ, because you can't have the law without the gospel, if you will. So this is the circumcision party that you hear about in the book of Acts, but also the one that you hear about in Galatians. So St. Paul was one of the most outspoken critics of this. He and Peter were talking about this. Peter, he shied away from talking about it at least one point in time, and Paul had to rebuke him to his face. That's also in the book of Galatians. But Paul's books of Galatians and Romans are primarily dealing with this issue. Well, how are you saved? And it's not that you have to be under the law of Moses. And even being under the law of Moses doesn't mean that you're more saved, because that the Jews have failed that law so many times over. And then Paul says, well, the Gentiles who are not under that law, well, they wouldn't be judged by that law, but they're still not exempt, because the law of God has been written upon the heart since the beginning. So the Gentiles know that they're doing wrong. They don't necessarily know how wrong they are, because they don't have the law of Moses to help guide them. We still teach the 10 Commandments within our church, of course. But yeah, the Gentiles would also be self-condemned. So this is why St. Paul says, and we'll have this reading on Reformation Day, that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So regardless of what ethnicity you were, whether you're Jews, God-fearing Jews who are under the Mosaic law, or whether you're the most godless Gentiles who never heard of the law before, they're all condemned by our own sin.
So the law of their hearts, is that like the conscience?
To a degree, yes. I would say it's the universal moral law, but now I'm splitting hairs. In any case, well, sorry, yeah, to illustrate that, if you look at people suffering from psychopathy, so people who are literally psychopaths, they do know the difference between right and wrong. Like that's a rational idea that you can tell that this is right, this is wrong. But since they don't have the emotional compulsion towards empathy and sympathy, they violate the moral rules all the time. Well, maybe not all the time. There's some psychopaths who actually do very well in society and who are actually somewhat respectful. But disproportionately in prisons, you find people who are suffering from psychopathy. I don't want to just be mean to all those psychopaths, because it's not like they're choosing this. They just find it difficult to make them proper moral citizens. So you could say that they don't have a proper conscience in terms of the emotional aspect of it, but they do know the moral law. Okay, so going back a little bit. So this particular issue was settled at the first church council ever, This is the Council of Jerusalem in Acts chapter 15. And they basically came down and to decide with the statement from St. Peter and evidence from Peter as well as Paul and Barnabas that the Gentiles have been saved apart from the law. If you're going to be saved, it is by purely the good news of Jesus' grace. It is not going to be by putting yourself under law. It is only by grace in Christ. So St. James, the brother of Jesus, who was presiding over that council, he then decided to put that in the letter and kind of put that out there. But he also gave some guidelines. Hey, don't involve yourselves in this or that, the other thing, because that's going to be detrimental to your faith. So disagreements come early on because we're sinners. And they didn't stop even during persecution. Okay. So let's go a little bit more towards Jesus. We haven't filled in the top bit. So what does Jesus say? Do you know what Jesus says about men and women?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. What does he say about what?
So we have here in creation, women are coming from man. We have either a division between male and female. They're all saved just the same by grace through faith. So what does Jesus say about the relationship between men and women? Where do women come from? Where do they fit?
We're all heirs.
Okay, well that's definitely St. Paul. In my mind, I was trying to bring a little bit more continuity. I was trying to go back to Jesus' own words because I've done so much with Paul already. But Jesus actually says, "Don't you know? In the beginning, God made male and female." So when Jesus is commenting on this, he's going directly back to the order of creation. Order of creation doesn't change. St. Paul, when he's talking about order of creation, even here in 1 Timothy, doesn't change. Your roles within the church can change, sure. Your roles over a lifetime can change. But creation itself was brought forth under God's word and law and rule for specific purposes. So it doesn't change. Like we can sin, we can go against that, but it should still be fulfilling this. I'll also draw on this. So Jesus, like shortly after he even mentions this, he then talks about divorce. Do you remember what Jesus says on divorce?
A man should not divorce a woman unless she has been unfaithful.
Yeah, so do not divorce. And then we have an exception of marital unfaithfulness. And that can be a little bit broader than adultery, a little bit. Because we could say if there's some significant abuse within the relationship, why would Jesus put a woman right back in that situation? But we could also say that this works both ways. So there are cases where women can be incredibly abusive in relationships. Why would we say a man has to go back in that abuse? And women can be unfaithful in marriage. Why would Jesus say that men can't divorce their wives if wives can't divorce their husbands over marital unfaithfulness? So this holds true for both sexes. What Jesus is trying to do is he's actually trying to get the Jews to have greater faithfulness to their spouses. So why does Jesus have to say this? What are the Pharisees saying? Jesus is saying this for a reason, and he's countering the Pharisees. So what are the Pharisees trying to say? I can say Matthew.
Moses provided a way. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Moses said something about it. That's what they were saying.
So they're saying, well, Moses provided a certificate of divorce and could send a wife away. That's what they're claiming. And Jesus actually responds, well, Moses did this because you were sinners. Your hearts were hard. So Jesus is saying that might have been true for a time, but God is calling you to greater faithfulness in your life. Well, spouse in general, because women could also try to divorce men. In Jesus' day, women couldn't exactly divorce men, but in the modern day, either party can initiate that. So divorce is sin, is basically what Jesus is trying to say. So because you were sinful, Moses allowed divorce to occur basically to protect somebody, mostly the one who would be abused within the marriage. But Jesus is not condoning divorce whatsoever. He's saying this is only in the direst circumstance. Jesus elsewhere, of course, is going to be talking so much about forgiveness. And we would truly hope that any marital unfaithfulness could be forgiven. We hope so. It's going to be rocky, of course, especially considering what that unfaithfulness was. Because if it was somebody who had a one-night stand, one of the spouses had a one-night stand, that might be easier to forgive than a person having, let's say, a five-year-long affair. So one is, well, yes, this person was unfaithful, and that person can hopefully be brought back. The other one is you were living outside the marriage for 5 years.
So you said you hoped it could be forgiven.
Yes.
You're talking about this other spouse forgiving. Because God can forgive any sin, can't he?
Yeah.
Except this sin against the Holy
Oh yeah,
Spirit.
well, but that's also what we'd be talking about with, is this person just living in unrepentant sin? Are they saying that this is okay? So it could even be the case, like once that sin is exposed, that person comes to church and they go, yeah, I've been sleeping with this other woman for 5 years. It's been great. Why doesn't everybody do this? At which point you now have to wonder, okay, well, you're obviously in unrepentance. So the pastor and the elder should be talking to this guy. And if he's not repenting, then it would be the duty of the pastor to recommend excommunication of this individual. Because if he's unrepentant and he's spreading sin, like he's actually promoting sin in the congregation, then you have to seriously consider putting him outside the congregation because you do not want sin to spread. So St. Paul deals with a particular case, not that exact case, but he deals with a case in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, where he says, like, yeah, this person is living in unrepentant sin, cast him out of the church. And hopefully that will actually wake him up by having Satan torment him outside of grace, so that he would actually repent of his evil. Because if that person's being told about grace again and again and again, they're not getting it, then the only way for them to repent is to be tortured by the law, which is what Satan does. Okay. So in general, though, Jesus is trying to uphold women in society, and he's trying to make sure that they're not abused within those relationships, which there would be a tendency of doing in Jesus' day. Now, the Jews would, in general, because of the Mosaic law, they'd be better than a lot of the surrounding cultures, because, yeah, in some of the surrounding cultures, women were a different social class than men. Not so in Judaism. In Judaism, women can hold property because you have to decide, okay, well, how are you reckoning this eternal inheritance of land? And it went through the male line. So women couldn't have property, but women were still seen as fully human. Like if you assaulted a man, you would receive the same punishment as if you assaulted a woman. Whereas in some of the other ancient cultures, if you assault a man, that would warrant a worse punishment than if you assault a woman. So yeah, there wasn't this two-tiered system, unless you start looking at, well, how are women being treated by, say, like the Pharisees, and also say the Sadducees. No, I'm misspelling this. Oh, okay.
But that's all what you've written up there, that's all with Jesus, so what were the Pharisees saying?
Yeah, so the Pharisees, well, they're saying, well, yeah, we can divorce our wives if they're unpleasant. Why can't we just divorce them? Which is more or less what you get even now. It's like,
Yeah.
oh no, I don't love my wife anymore. She nags too much, and then and here, like we're also seeing that, yes, there's very much a cultural push to have marriage relationships. There's not as much honoring of singleness. So widowhood was not as honorable as some would think. But the Christian church, what they were trying to do is they're trying to help support the widows in the community and actually try to give them more purpose by teaching the younger generations of the church. Here also, it's like, yeah, the women are compared to the church itself. Therefore, men, die for your wives. Make sure you sacrifice yourselves for them. And all that is flowing from Jesus trying to honor what was going on at the very beginning, which Jesus Christ himself being God created. So Jesus isn't exactly revolutionary. Especially when we also get to paradise, as we're seeing. Well, the paradise is somewhat revolutionary because we're finding a whole bunch of things no longer applicable because like what are we talking about divorce if we can't even have marriages? So some things are inapplicable over here, but in the here and now, Jesus is trying to honor women as what they should have been over here. So in this way, Jesus would be more reactionary. So we have reactionary here. However, since he is bringing about a paradise that fundamentally shifts some of these things, over here it's revolutionary. So reactionary means that you're going to the older system, that you're trying to bring back what is initially commanded. And Pharisees themselves were revolutionaries because what they did was they created a new religious system that you had to abide by. So Jesus is saying, hey, your new system sucks. You're actually disobeying the law of God more than you're actually honoring it. So why are you trying to force people to do this? So Jesus is trying to get rid of a lot of the hypocrisy in his day and truly fulfill what was designed at the origin of creation. But since we're coming into a new relationship with God, a fundamentally new relationship with God, by way of Jesus cleansing us by his body and blood, like so, removing the sin that is in us, this is revolutionary. So we have a different relationship with God in the paradise to come than we would now. Yeah, that would be more revolutionary. Because we also talk about the old covenant and the new covenant. So Jesus brings about the new covenant. So that part would absolutely be revolutionary because we're no longer sacrificing animals at the temple. So yes, he's revolutionary that way because he fulfilled all the things that came before. But the reason why we're not doing that is because he fulfilled everything that came before. We don't need to offer any of those sacrifices. So is this a revolution or is this bringing things back into what it should have been in the first place? So yeah, this is one of the interesting questions that we could keep asking and discussing. There is a revolution in certain senses, but I'm more prone to say that this is reactionary, that this is going back to God's original design. Okay, I'll be quiet.
So you're saying Jesus was conservative?
I don't like using modern labels on ancient figures quite like this because we would be meaning something very different by conservative than what is actually found here. So I don't want to say that Jesus was conservative, but if we're saying conservative nowadays is about, let's say, family values, then yeah, Jesus is all about family values. He wants to uphold the family. If it's about individual rights, then yeah, Jesus is actually trying to put emphasis on the individual to act for the betterment of the people around him, not trying to foist this on the government, which is more of a socialist or liberal, I guess you could say, new liberal point of view. But it's not as though, let's say, like Jesus is trying to argue for gun rights or something like that. Although some people have really tried because there's like one passage in Luke as the disciples are moving from the Last Supper to Gethsemane, where Jesus asks, does anybody have a sword? It's like, we have two. Good. And then people are like, see, Jesus wants us to have guns. That's all. That's it. Jesus even tells Peter, don't use your sword. Like in just a couple hours, he said, like, don't do this. We'll die by this sword. So, yeah, people try to read a whole bunch of viewpoints into this. Well, excuse me. Well, even like there was a fellow that I had to unfriend on Facebook not too long ago. I only do that if that person is unwilling to listen and is actually manipulative. So that he did actually post something racist against, like he was accusing people of being racist just by being white. And I kind of pointed out, like, no, that's not a Christian attitude. And then he deleted my comment, the guy's comment that he was replying to, and then made it. And I was wondering, like, usually this guy tries to yell at me, so why isn't he giving me a reply? So I looked back at that post. So yeah, deleted the comment chain, and then wrote elsewhere on that post, like, I'm not saying anything racist, like using the exact wording that he used against that one guy. He's saying, like, I'm not saying this. Oh, you're a liar. Anyways, so that person, like, he's very much a well, again, you could use any of the common labels for this progressivist woke, this new left, whatever. Like it's cultural Marxism to a degree. Okay, so he's using Marxist ideologies, and then he's trying to bring in Christianity to try and support these things. So I've tried to call him on it a number of different times, but this is also what you find, is that people have the political agenda, and then they try to just find anything in the Bible that would support it. Or they find passages in the Bible which disagree with it, and then they say, well, yeah, these passages don't say what they say. Which is just as dishonest. So, if you get an accurate historian, that historian will recognize, yes, they're using different methodologies and ideas that we are not using today. Please don't have a revision of the past to try and fit your modern perspective. Actually view it as what it was. Okay, now
if I may say, I see Jesus as a divine humanitarian. Divine because he came from God. And humanitarian because he tried to protect the underprivileged.
Yeah, so for me, I would again, yeah, hesitate to use modern labels like humanitarian on this, because if we're looking at, well, what is Jesus trying to do? And we'll shy away from this in particular because we're looking at the women specifically here. So when we're looking at Jesus Christ, when he's going about, he's praising, let's say, the woman who offers the mites because she has given everything she has to God. He's also looking at the Gentile woman, Syrophoenician woman, who comes up to him and professes that, yeah, he is the Christ, and she's looking for help, and then he also helps her. There's the centurion who does much the same thing, who, even though he's not a Jew, Jesus is also healing the blind, healing the sick, etc., etc., etc. So I wouldn't necessarily use the terminology of humanitarian, because what Jesus is actually trying to do is he's trying to bring about paradise on earth. So he is praising people for properly honoring God, He's casting out demons because demons have no place in the paradise. He's healing flesh because that flesh should be restored in paradise. He's bringing people back in relationship with God because all people should come to God and live, etc., etc. So Jesus was very much trying to restore, or depending on how you want to view the relationship of creation to paradise, he's trying to restore creation, or he's trying to bring about a new paradise. But so yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that he's a humanitarian. Actually, a good example would be when Jesus gets or is trying to get cast out of the synagogue in Capernaum, because Jesus goes up there. So he's in a room full of rabbis, Jewish rabbis, and he says, he speaks a passage from Isaiah, and then he says, "And God has fulfilled this in your midst." And they go like, "Really?" And it's like, "Yes." It's like, "You don't know about that." It's like, "Okay, but why do you think Elijah went to this pagan territory in the Old Testament?" It was because the Jews, like, they were also in need of a whole bunch of miracles and help. God didn't send Elijah to the Jews, he sent him to the pagans because he knew that he would actually be received by them. And then all the rabbis got mad at him because they're thinking, no, salvation belongs only to the Jews. But Jesus was pointing out, no, restoration belongs to those who are faithful. So Jesus is still trying to fight it among faith lines, rather than like everybody in need must receive this. Because Jesus didn't heal like absolutely every single last person that he saw. He healed many. We don't know how many because we only have records of some. But his goal was to promote paradise and try to draw more people into faith so that they could be restored here rather than restored here, which is more the work of the humanitarian.
The healing of Jesus he practiced, I feel it plays a real great role, because he said to the people that were healed, "You were healed by your faith."
Yeah.
That is-
So that's looking more towards paradise.
Yeah.
So he's not healing the unbelievers. And even in the wording there, it's actually very interesting, because the word in Greek has double entendres. So it can mean heal, it can also mean save. So Jesus is saying, your faith has made you well, your faith has saved you. So I would actually lean a little bit more in those passages to say that Jesus is claiming your faith has saved you, and thus you were healed. So I would say that just by virtue of how Jesus is approaching the kingdom of God, that he's looking more towards salvation by faith, and then whatever benefits the body would have after.
Yeah.
And people can disagree with me on that, but I would say that is my viewpoint.
In the German language, we have a word for Jesus, which is Heiland. Heiland.
Okay, yeah.
And my grandma used this a lot, which actually means, thank you. It actually means the one who is healing. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
because that would also be a very accurate thing to say, because Jesus is healing. I mean, he's healing us first and foremost spiritually, but so that the body can be raised in the end, be clothed with immortality. Yeah. And of course, we don't want to deny any possible miracles that God can perform around us, because I don't want to say, yeah, don't pray for miraculous healing of anybody. Like we should be praying about that all the time. We don't necessarily expect it all the time, but we should be praying for it all the time, because God does work miracles, even that. Yeah. Alrighty.